So today we have Melanie Weller, and right on Melanie's website, it says, I help individuals and organizations optimize mental health and flow state through the language of the vagus nerve. Now, I just want to give a brief intro before we get into our conversation. Melanie is the world's leading expert in opening the door to health, performance, and innovation through the vagus nerve, which is the bridge between our narratives and our physical experience. A storyteller for the human body, Melanie has an extensive background in stress management, chronic conditions, and people who haven't yet found success. She now focuses on strengthening the leading edge in businesses, speakers, entertainers, athletes, artists, and medical professionals. A few things about her is she's a physical therapist, board certified orthopedic clinical specialist, certified athletic trainer, and certified exercise expert for aging adults. Do I qualify for aging adult? I feel like it sometimes.
Sometimes, yeah. Well, it goes, you have to help the one end of the spectrum, you have to understand the other. I think it's helpful to understand the the process, and we're all endlessly aging for sure.
That's the truth. That's the truth. Well, thank you for being here. Thank you.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to talk with you.
The first question I ask everybody on my podcast, and it gives our listeners a little insight to you. When you wake up in the morning, what is it that just makes your heart jump out of your chest for the day? Just sing out loud for the day that's ahead of you.
I absolutely love the problem solving that goes with life. And I know that's kind of a strange answer because we don't necessarily crave problems, but I think the puzzle and how things work and why things work the way we do is so incredibly curious to me. And I love the adventure of really decoding it. And especially after, in my own story, after not having my head in a really great place for a number of years, I think, I'm so in love with just this puzzle that we all are, and to see all the different ways that we can shift energy and solve it and think about things to really open up new pathways that haven't been widely opened up previously.
I love that answer. Thank you. It kind of, I want to actually play off of that there. It reminds me of something I was reading recently about how as individuals, sometimes we try to perfect our lives, and like make it so there's no stress and there's no problems and everything's just going to be smooth. And it was playing on how like that can, if you like, first off, it's perfectionism. It can be boring. And like you kind of said, learning, I don't know, like realizing that there's so much more that we can discover in life by looking at all the, I guess, harder things or connectors that you're explaining.
Right. Well, stress ultimately is like exercise. You don't get stronger unless you stress the muscle at the optimal dose.
Right.
And I think the stress in our lives is very much the same way. You don't grow unless you have some amount of tension that, and I think what that leads to is expansion, ultimately.
Like self-expansion.
And I would say that the root of any problem, whether it's physical, mental, emotional, mindset, however you want to frame it, is resisting our own expansion in an ever-expanding universe.
Yes. Can you say that again? Resisting our own expansion.
It's resisting our own expansion in an ever-expanding universe.
I love that. That's cool. And as a vagus nerve, I guess we'll just use the word expert, or I'm not sure how to touch on that, but what does that have a lot to do with it? Like first off, what is it meant by vagus nerve? Like what is that in our body? What does it mean for people that have no clue?
Sure. So I'll describe what it's like when your vagus nerve is not working so well, because we are all very familiar with this.
Okay.
And so this is maybe when you're going to do some public speaking or something that might make you similarly nervous. and you get a lump in your throat and your palms start to sweat and your heart's racing and your stomach feels funny. And those are all vagus nerve mediated functions. And when you get those nervous sensations, it's because your fight and flight system has taken over, and your vagus nerve and your parasympathetic nervous system have been dialed down. Your vagus nerve is the largest part of your parasympathetic nervous system, which is your rest and digest. It's your grace under pressure. It's your pleasure pathway. It's what mediates inflammation, helps you absorb nutrients. The vagus nerve is your 10th cranial nerve. We have 12 nerves that come out of our brainstem. And so the vagus nerve is the 10th one of those. And as it comes out of your brainstem, it goes down to your heart and it loops back up to innervate your vocal cords. So I like to think of it as the nerve that allows us to speak our hearts.
Okay.
It continues down to go through our diaphragms and innervates the muscles of the digestive system. In women, it goes into the cervix. And I haven't found the equivalent anatomical innervation for men. There's a group of electrocardiologists that are mapping the vagus nerve right now because they know we don't know everything it does. The vagus nerve, like I said earlier, it mediates inflammation. It mediates digestive enzyme and bile secretion, nutrient and water absorption. And that's just skimming the surface. And the research, they found that how well your vagus nerve functions has predictive value for how long people with pancreatic cancer will live. So it has a immune system function, because our gut, 70% of our immune system is in our gut anyway. So your vagus nerve is going to be a large part of that immune
because it goes through it
system. Right. It goes through it, and it actually, and it wires your gut. It's the electrical wiring to your gut.
Well, so how can we keep the vagus nerve healthy? Is there anything specific we can do for
yes
that?
Yes, and that's what I've really built my practice on is that exact thing. So, and certainly things like meditation and mindfulness and are great for vagus nerve function, and taking cold showers are great for vagus nerve function. There's singing is great for your vagus nerve because it innervates your vocal cords.
Well, Melanie, let me stop you. So first, because my goal is to get as many people as possible meditating 10 minutes a day, every day. What is it that meditation does for your vagus nerve, specifically that? And then I want to go to cold showers.
We all have so the gold standard measure for the vagus nerve is called heart rate variability.
Okay.
And it's a very well-established research measure. There's over 200,000 papers on heart rate variability. And so we all have a normal range that, depending on our age, there's just normative data on it. And meditation improves your heart rate variability, so you stay more in your optimal zone.
Yeah, I heard you use fight or flight earlier, and I know meditation helps you control that fight or flight.
Absolutely. You're really exercising your vagus nerve when you're meditating.
Okay. I know these feelings you were explaining all too well early. So what else? So you were saying cold showers. I mean, these are just specific things, but obviously there's like other stuff involved.
Right. So these are things that are just out there, like have been around for a long time and that many people talk about relative to the vagus nerve. What's different about my work is I talk about treating the vagus nerve as a pinched nerve.
Okay.
Within the body. And so we know through the research that trauma always affects the voice and the breath. And we experience this. We scream or we can't scream, we gasp, when something terrible happens, we say that took my breath away.
Yeah.
And our vocal cords and our diaphragms are horizontally oriented in our body. And our pelvic floors are also horizontally oriented in the body. And certainly in severe cases of trauma, some people will lose bowel and bladder control as well. And so there is this system, what I could call a system of horizontal structures in the body that are influenced by our stress and trauma. And as a response to the stress and trauma, they will contract, they will shorten, they will tighten, they will create extra tension within that. Nobody gets stressed or traumatized and has really great arm swing when they walk. You know, people that walk with really relaxed arm swing, we interpret that as that they're feeling really happy, that they're joyful, that they're not stressed.
Because they're like loose, kind of.
They're loose, exactly. Exactly. So when we experience that stress and trauma, rotation is the first motion that we give up.
Ah, interesting.
And over the years, what I've discovered is that the more acute a person's stress is, the less rotation they have. And it's not always like they're walking like Frankenstein.
Sure.
We're all incredibly skilled compensators when it comes to movement. We all take the path of least resistance. And so, but through my biomechanical testing, knowing how to isolate movement at particular joints, I found that that when rotation is locked up, particularly systemically, and when it's severely locked up systemically, that there's always an underlying mental health issue. And I know exactly when to ask about things like suicide ideation now, because it shows up very predictably in the body to me. And I'm looking for, I've been pitching this to psychiatrists and some researchers to try and to build it into a research program, because I think it's so valuable as a screening tool to be able to really look at that, at how the body drives our physical health. And when I treat a lot of people with anxiety and depression, there are very specific breathing patterns that go with that. And I would say that the way they're breathing is driving their anxiety. And if you give them the option to breathe differently, then they are less anxious. And when you decompress their vagus nerve, they become less anxious. You can't always meditate or mindfulness yourself out of a pinched vagus nerve. Or maybe you can, but it's the long road.
Right. That makes sense.
And so if you go to my website, melanieweller.com, there, and sign up for my email list, it will send you a free vagus nerve decompression course where you can evaluate, goes through a full evaluation and exercises head to toe so that you can do this for yourself.
Is there like massaging involved in it too? Is it?
No,
touch?
it's, well, for the do-it-yourself part of it is largely breathing exercises in specific positions.
Ah.
So, for example, several of the positions add some left rotation. Basically, I have people reaching across their body with their right arm.
Okay.
Because in all humans, the right side of the diaphragm has more muscle mass than the left. So theoretically, the right side will always win. Your liver's over there, so there's a greater stimulus to lay down more tissue adjacent to the liver. Most of us are right-handed, and we live in a right-handed world, even if you're left-handed.
Yeah, good point.
And so people tend to get locked down in that right diaphragm dominance. And so the exercises I have people typically only do them one direction because it takes you out of that right diaphragm dominance. So they're not ones you necessarily do symmetrically. And the other piece of that is that there's a whole underlying cosmology to this that I'd love. Oh,
yeah,
go ahead.
let's actually. I was going to say
Yeah.
that was that's kind of where I wanted to bring it next, because that's what actually interests me the most as I like go on my spiritual journey over the past couple of years. You like how, in what ways do our, because you're talking a lot about the body here and
Mm-hmm.
noticing the body, how do we mimic the earth and the cosmos? Um, how is that happening
Yeah.
as we speak?
Well, this has been so much fun to to uncover, and my own journey into it came in the midst of the throes of my own midlife crisis slash spiritual awakening that and trying to reconcile the like I have a lot of letters after my name through my professional associations that I've collected over the years, and reconciling all of my credentials with my more intuitive, softer skills. And in the midst of that, I did a lot of reading. I backed off of seeing patients for a little while and did a lot of reading. And one of the things that I learned was that mythology was a mode of communicating scientific information. So, for example, in the Egyptian myth of Isis and Osiris are numbers of the Earth's precessional cycle. So the story was how they communicated the cosmology. And there are other major myths from other cultures that have the same numbers. They were liberal with the decimal points, but the sense of it all is there. And when I read that, my first thought was, oh, the Earth's at a 23.5-degree angle. What's 23.5 degrees from the midline of the body? Because as a physical therapist, I do a lot of measuring angles. And so I pulled out my anatomy books, and in all of my anatomy books, and I've had the chance since to also look at real human skulls and casts of ancient skulls. And in all of them, where the vagus nerve exits the base of the skull is 23.5 degrees from the center of where the spinal cord exits the skull. And you could ask, knowing how to decompress the vagus nerve at the base of the skull is a fairly common osteopathic based technique. And if you talk to any physical therapist or osteopathic doctor or chiropractor that knows how to do this, they would say that this is absolutely like putting somebody back on their axis. Like it just has a very, very profound effect on the human body, on the whole body. And I love decompressing the base of the vagus nerve at the base of the skull and seeing how foot and ankle mechanics change and how knee biomechanics change. And it will just really change a person's whole body. And I know through my formal training that normal rotation between C1 and C2 is 47 degrees to each side. So it's twice that 23.5. And there's 47 degrees between the pole stars that our Earth points towards over thousands of years. And the anterior cruciate ligament sits at a 47-degree angle of inclination in the knee. And
A lot of similarities.
Very, very many. Right. So I knew off that, like I had all these, 23 and 47-degree angles just emblazoned in my head from my formal training over the years. And so, for me, that's, I call those critical angles. And what I would say is that when the fewer critical angles you have in place, the less likely you are to feel well. And the research shows us that when solar and space weather disrupt the electromagnetic field of the Earth, it is measurable in our vagus nerves.
In what way?
Our vagus nerves, it affects your heart rate variability. It alters the heart rate variability. And the extent to which it affects you depends on the strength of your interpersonal connections. So when you have good relationships and good social stability, you don't get so blown about by the solar and space weather. But because the vagus nerve innervates the heart, it's creating the electromagnetic field of your heart. And heart cells synchronize. They synchronize with each other. They synchronize with what's around them. And you put two heart cells beating at different paces in a petri dish and they will sync up with each other. That's what heart cells do. And so our hearts, our electromagnetic fields are also synchronizing with the Earth's electromagnetic field. And there's research that shows how this works. And so, and when I think about that right diaphragm dominance and how when people are stuck in a little bit of right rotation and right side bending, the Earth below us and the solar system above us are rotating the opposite direction. So they're really out of alignment on this fractal scale, this much bigger scale than what we're considering. And some of the, basic exercises can bring you back into that alignment. My background is in treating people that have been around the block a few times and that haven't had success. And so over the years, what I really came to understand was how what was happening inside of their bodies was very metaphoric for what was happening outside. As a physical therapist, we spend a lot of time with our patients, and so you get to know them very often on a more personal level. And so I would hear about what was happening in their marriage and in their business and with their kids, and that these stresses were just all, it was very clear to me, even 20, 25 years ago, that there was this correlation between what was happening in their life and what was happening in their body. And my superpower intuitively is really helping people with the spiritual underpinnings of their physical dysfunction. And beyond the critical angle part of what I did, in the midst of my own crisis, I was studying astrology to figure myself out.
Yeah.
And I have this favorite image of the ventricles of the brain, and the ventricles make cerebral spinal fluid. And it's a compilation of MRI images to give you a 3D picture of what the ventricles look like. And the next time I pulled it out after I'd been studying astrology, I was like, oh, those look just like the ram's horns for Aries. And in astrology, Aries rules the head. And so then I was like, well, where's the rest of it if mythology is this mode of scientific writing that we haven't really fully uncovered?
Sure.
And sure enough, the way your hyoid bone in your throat sits on top of your larynx looks just like the symbol for Taurus, and Taurus rules the throat. And the aortic arch is the same shape as the symbol for Leo, and Leo rules the heart. And it works this way the whole way through the body. So then you can use the story to help really dig into those spiritual underpinnings of the physical dysfunction. As medically, we know stress is 75 to 90% of all disease and illness, but we don't really define what that is very precisely. And I find stress lives in our bodies very precisely. And I've created a whole form of energy medicine around it as well, because this is just literally how the cosmos is coded into us. And when we can get into that bigger alignment, it opens up doors to not only to being pain-free, but doors to creativity, to innovation, to leadership, to performance.
So you're telling me that, which is, I saw this picture on your Instagram, I believe you posted it recently. Is that right? The image you're talking about? Are you saying that before technology was even here to get this image, and all these astrology signs were created with their symbols, it matches?
It does. It all matches. I think that, well, and in the archaeology and anthropology world, they're discovering that ancient people were way smarter than we've ever given them credit for.
Yeah.
That they had knowledge that, perhaps didn't entirely get passed down.
I wonder if they had more of an energy type knowledge, like they were more aligned with the universe than we are now.
Absolutely. Maybe? I mean, they lived by the cosmology. That's why,
right.
They knew when the Egyptians knew when the Nile was going to flood based on when Sirius rose above the horizon.
Right. We've lost all of that.
We've lost all of that. So they lived much more in alignment with the cosmos, and they lived more in alignment with their intuition. I think, that was a higher value proposition as we've come through, I would say, somewhere in the window of ancient Greece, those pieces of, that part of ourselves, our intuitive senses, really lost that value.
I mean,
you know,
that kind of like, yeah, that kind of made my mind just go like I never really thought about that. You know, yeah, interesting. What about, are you, I know you like, are you well versed on examining birth charts, or is that just something you
I
kind
do,
of looked into a little bit?
yeah, no, I can do it decently well. I do. I look at where, uh, I look at wounding and nourishment patterns largely
All right, okay.
in the birth
Oh,
chart. So, I mean, there's pieces of it that I use, and I will refer out to an astrologer when things are,
like, are you
you know,
able to do a little like
oh yeah,
here
absolutely.
with me, like for on
Yeah,
something, like just for the
absolutely.
audience listening, be like
Sure.
I don't even know where to start though. So how does that, what do
All
you
right.
need from
Well,
me?
what I need from you, I need your birthday, location, and time. And
Oh,
I can do a little energy evaluation on you too, just to, um,
so I mean June 30th, 1984, and location is like the city of Rochester, New York. And oh my, should I know? Am I supposed to know what time I was born?
you are.
I should know that, huh? So I've been told that many times, but I just don't remember the exact time. We'll see if my mother can text me back within the next couple minutes here.
Okay. All right. Well, I'll do a little,
Interesting. You know, and there's this show on Netflix that made me learn it. It's I forget what it's called, but it's in India. It's a matchmaker that matches up couples,
mhm.
individuals, and they use the astrology chart like
Yeah, the Vedic
to a T.
astrology is really, I am not as, I've had a Vedic astrology reading. I'm not as fluent in their system. But it is absolutely, I know many people that have had, where their Vedic astrologer has said, well, you're going to meet the person of your dreams in like 3 years. And then literally in 3 years, it happens. You know, like that somehow it's
So
very precise with relationships, more than I'm familiar with Western astrology. The coolest thing about the Vedic system is that the Vedas all describe our human anatomy too. And we have, structures within our cells that are shaped like all of the constellations, like, adenosine triphosphate, ATP, which is the energy that's produced by the mitochondria in the cells, is shaped like the Aries constellation, and cytoplasm is shaped like the Cancer constellation. And so there's, we are literally, even at the intracellular level, mimicking the cosmology.
so what does this tell us though? Like, what is it? So
Well,
what do we use that? Like, okay, great, we
yeah.
know this. How do we use it? How do we
Sure.
for
So your
ourselves?
vagus nerve is also the bridge between your story and your body. So when your story is stress and trauma, your vagus nerve is going to be dialed down. And when your story is gratitude, appreciation, purpose, meaning, those kinds of things, your vagus nerve gets dialed up. And the difference between acute, subacute pain and chronic pain is that chronic pain gets locked into the limbic system, which is where our emotions are in our brain.
Yeah.
And you cannot logic yourself out of your limbic system. You have to have an emotional key to let it out. All of the leading pain science experts say that they get really excited when somebody cries or gets angry when they explain pain to them, because they know they're going to get better. It's the people with a flat affect that they worry about. And as humans, we connect with story more than we do with process. And so story is an incredibly potent tool to really get to the root of the pain and get that pain to move so that it doesn't, so it's not just on this continuous feedback loop. And I would say that I suspect not only chronic pain, but also chronic limiting beliefs, chronic habits are also stuck in that limbic system. And when you can connect with a story emotionally, which is why we like movies, why we read books, the thing, that it just really has that power. For years I've said I'm really good at making people cry. And I'm so good at, I was so happy to learn that from the
Great.
pain science experts that
So what do you do?
Yeah.
I'm just really good at making people cry. That's what you should just tell people from now on.
Right.
And just leave it at that. Don't explain it anymore.
And getting your vagus nerve open, giving it more space to move is really powerful in opening up that emotional piece. Cause I would say that, like the trauma science experts will say that we store our trauma very much in our vagus nerves, or that's really a reflection of our trauma. I would say that your vagus nerve itself is actually traumatized because it's getting crushed in those horizontal structures, that it's got a physical stress on it. And that if you can take off the physical stress, you can open doors to amazing things. And I'll give you a really great example of this. I was referred a client through, we have a mutual friend, and she texted me and said, my friend really needs to see you. How soon can you get him in? I'm going to pay for it. And it worked out that I was able to see him that day. And so he comes into my office, and I'm assuming that he's going to have some kind of orthopedic pain, because that's most of what I had dealt with, particularly at that point in my practice. And he had an acute onset of hallucinations and was living in a nightmare where people's faces were melting, and he had a trauma that had shifted his brain chemistry into this state. And so I knew I couldn't send him, that sending him out the door felt like the wrong thing to do, to say, oh, this is not in my wheelhouse, I don't know what to do, was not didn't feel like the right thing to do at the moment. He also seemed like he needed more help than I maybe could offer him. So I got him connected with a psychiatrist. And then I said, okay, I'll decompress your vagus nerve. And I'm just going to treat what I find. We'll see how this goes. And so I decompressed his vagus nerve, and I gave him a good intuitive reading. I really kind of got to some of those spiritual underpinnings as well. And at the end of our session, 90% of his hallucinations were gone. And he texted me later that night, and he said, Melanie, you saved my life, and not in the cute kind of way. He was planning suicide if what we did that day did not work. And it's incredibly, I had no idea that this process could have any effect on anything like that whatsoever, much less to, within an hour or so to
that's dramatic.
Resolve 90% of it. And so
for somebody like that, yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, no. It's the body really, I was able to change his physical structure, and to really open the things up, and in a way that completely changed his mental health. And so this way, I'm very passionate about how mental health shows up in the physical body, and that it's not so much or to consider that it's not just the external stress that works its way into our body to create anxiety and depression and things like that, but that there's a whole movement that we know that our posture changes our hormones, and that our structure and our movement is an integral part of how we create our thoughts, and how we get into a flow state, and just how information flows through us. And, with all of these horizontal structures, when the universe is trying to give you all the good information about yourself and show you how incredibly beautiful and fantastic you are, and it's trying to put a fire hose's worth of information through a coffee straw, it's going to get distorted.
Like the pinch you talked about
earlier. Yes. Yeah. And I contextualize a lot of this around the vagus nerve, but certainly you're going to get compression of arterial flow and venous flow and lymphatic flow and, all the vertical flow in your body. And you're going to get energetic compression too, that there's this structural description is very consistent with qi flow and qi blockages from Chinese medicine. It aligns very well with that paradigm. And in the way that the cosmos is rotational, and it just doesn't allow you to kind of line up with that bigger, when you're off in terms of alignment with that, it doesn't let you hook into the bigger energy fields that are so pleasurable.
Flow.
And that we act with flow. Absolutely. That access, to access flow. And your vagus nerve stimulation and the research remaps your brain at the highest levels. So it really does change, like your vagus nerve is your gut brain and it's your heart brain. And you have way more connections going from there up to your brain than you do from your brain down to your heart and your gut. Your brain is just responding to what's happening in your energy field and what's come through your vagus nerve and what's come through your body. By the time it's gotten to your brain, it's already been filtered and interpreted to some extent.
Wow. So yeah, I mean, a lot of what you're saying, this is like, is the whole idea of balance, of having the balance and releasing. It sounds like for someone like that individual, there was you released something.
Oh, absolutely.
Like there was just some sort of like a pop that allowed, I don't know. I mean, that's,
well, he would tell you,
dramatic.
Yeah. He would tell you that there was a moment that he felt like it all just kind of washed away.
Wow.
And
it's interesting because one of my favorite meditations to do now is like just a cleansing meditation where you're the guided, where you're just breathing in and re-oxygenating your body, kind of like cleaning it out using the oxygen, then breathing as like a cleansing, or like picturing a light that's like from the universe filling you up from the toes up and just re-energizing, re-clean. And that's what it kind of reminds me of, is doing that and creating that.
Absolutely. No, I would say even when your vagus nerve is not your primary problem, that it cleans the windshield so you can see what else is going on. And the game I've played with myself for years and years, especially in treating complicated chronic pain patients and others, is because when you evaluate them, they're dysfunctional head to toe. There's lots of stuff going on in their bodies. And so my challenge to myself was always, what 1 or 2 or 3 things can I do to make 10 or 20 or 30 things better? Really, where is the root of this?
Yeah. Good challenge. Good luck.
Well, and so it works often enough that I know this is possible. Like, this is what really lights me up. Like, I expect everybody to be better in one visit. It doesn't always happen. And I work with people online too, but I expect it, and it happens often enough that I believe it's always possible.
That's so cool.
And so there's, and we all, I think, again, part of what we lost in kind of the losing touch with our intuition and those more somatic sensations, or like our somatic language, if you want to talk about it like that, because I think it's very much a language, is just very fundamentally how our bodies say yes and how our bodies say no. Because by the time somebody shows up in my office with a physical pain, their body's been saying no for a long time,
and they've been just working through it,
and they've been working through it, and they're not listening to what's happening here.
That's, I'm so glad you said that. So for people listening, like, I think this came up one other time in the last year and a half of this podcast. It's just like, listen to your bodies. They're trying to tell you something, and so many of us don't. I think that's just because how we're conditioned, but that's so important.
Absolutely.
I think. Wow.
Absolutely.
Hey, so by the way, 5:30 p.m. I was born.
Awesome. Okay.
My mom found my lovely mother found my baby book. That's the exact minute. Oh, she said to go find it. Apparently I have the baby book. Right. I have no idea where it is.
Once I had my own children, my mom gave me mine, but she kept it until then. All right. So the astrology chart is divided up into 12 kind of slices of the pie. And I know if you want to enable screen sharing here, I'll share my screen with you so you can at least see what I'm looking at.
Are you able to do it?
It says the host is disabled participant screen sharing. I think you have to go under and change this.
Oh, there you go. All participants.
Yep, there we go. All right. So the astrology chart's is divided into 12 sections, and your moon is how you nourish yourself. And I really think everybody should know what house their moon is in, because it's just incredibly valuable information. So you have an 8th house moon, which is transformation and sexuality. So like your work with meditation and transformation is a huge part of your meditation practice is a huge part of your spiritual food. And that's how you best nourish yourself. And teaching meditation and helping others transform that, and having this podcast for transformation, that's really, you are wired for that to be your spiritual food.
I've said for a little while that the reason I started is I felt this weird sensation or calling, start this and focus on it. Oh yeah, okay, and become a meditation teacher.
Yeah, I have a 10th house moon, which is career and service. So my work really feeds me.
Okay.
Like if I don't work, I really start to crumble a little bit. Like there's my work just is endlessly fascinating and invigorating to me.
Yeah, and your chart shows it. It's the whole you read a book about, and a lot of books are one size fits all kind of with the whole movement of personal development and stuff like that. Where this shows you specifically. So far it makes sense. You said sexuality too. What did you say? You said
transformation and sexuality are the big 8th house things. It's I always have to look it up. It's other people's money as well. And I think that I would say that I don't have an 8th house moon, but I do also have an 8th house Venus, which you have.
Okay.
And I would say that you probably create, I manifest really well when I'm less inhibited sexually, or when I'm just when I'm just in a little bit of a, we have so many cultural overlays. I don't want this to come off the wrong way, but in a little bit of a juicier state, in a little bit of when I'm really connected with my creative power, or really, in my feminine, in my sexuality, then that's when I'll manifest amazing things, just kind of almost out of thin air. And I think there's an element of that we're all wired for that as sexual beings. But if you were to be more, or I know the more, I was brought up to be very sexually repressed. So it was.
Okay.
And so just the more that I've taken those layers off of it, and just to be more open and fun, but with all of that then that opens up my creative space where things that I
does it bring you more in flow too?
It totally brings me more in flow. Yeah. And all of that. So, but that's a piece of the 8th house thing too. And I love fabrics that feel good. The, things that I like fancy pens that feel good in my hands, things that, that there's this tactile, piece of that I think is also for me that 8th house.
And what you're saying is me too. I was using my gratitude journal. I was using a pen yesterday, and I'm this is not the type of pen I like to feel in my hand.
Yeah, right.
I almost had the urge to go to the store on Amazon and buy those pens that I like more of them because I don't have enough. That's funny.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I'm with you on that. And so I think that can show up, and that it doesn't have to express as overt promiscuity in any way, that it's just like, like embodying your sensualness and feeling good in your skin, and
Yeah. I can
and that
totally
kind of
relate to
stuff.
exactly what you're saying. Like I can just, I see that. I know, and I've actually noticed it. I noticed when my creativity is stronger and when it's not. And I have noticed it around like the sexuality part, where I'm at,
Yeah.
on the scale, I guess you could say,
Yeah.
at that time.
Yeah. And so the other piece I look at a lot is Chiron, the asteroid Chiron, which for you is in your 7th house, which is partnership. So
Okay.
I would say that's both your wounding and your superpower, like so you could think back on life where you've maybe been wounded in partnership, but where you're also very, very good at it. And, and my Chiron's in my 10th house. And so I can think about where I've been wounded career-wise. A part of my midlife crisis was that I had a professional lawsuit brought against me, which was crushing to my whole self-worth. And it was at a time when my body was falling apart and my marriage was struggling. And so my life was crumbling in all directions. But I was really able to take that lawsuit. It was a catalyst for me for really digging into what was happening within me and to work on myself. And ultimately it got dropped. And I firmly believe that it got dropped because I did the internal work to shift the energy of everything so that to basically spin it out of my energy field. There were concrete reasons that I had good documentation and other things, and it wasn't a solid case to start with, but it was, very, I stand much more firmly in my self-worth now, which is an incredible gift. And when you can take your trauma and see it as an initiation over a victimization, that's really where healing is. And that's really where flow is.
That's such a good statement right there. And it takes work, right? I mean,
Absolutely.
most people like the easy route.
Yeah. I
like
like the easy route too.
Yeah, but it's easier to hate people than choose love, right? That whole thing.
Yeah.
Which is going on in politics. It's easier to.
Yeah. And we love to sort of fester in our wounds for like there's this, or to really swim in it for a little while. I was telling somebody recently as we're just a week or two past the election, that I'm very fascinated by Stacey Abrams' story of losing the gubernatorial election in Georgia and flipping it around into this like much, much bigger platform that's taken her to a place where she has and is going to continue to have much more influence than she ever would have as the governor of Georgia. And I contextualize these kinds of stories around the myth of Isis and Osiris. And in that story, Osiris was the king of Egypt, and his brother Set was angry and jealous and wanted to be king. And so Set tricked Osiris into laying down in a bejeweled coffin, had his soldiers close the lid, nail it shut, and take Osiris to the Nile River, sending him downstream to his death. Osiris's wife Isis found out about this, and she went and retrieved Osiris's body, took him to a cave, and breathed new life back into him. Set found out about this and was furious, and he found Osiris and chopped his body into pieces and scattered the pieces down the Nile. When Isis found out about this, she gathered all of the pieces and took him back to the cave. She found everything except for his phallus, and for that she made a new one. And she brought him back to life long enough to conceive their divine child, Horus. And then Osiris went on to be king of the underworld, which for the Egyptians was where all life came from and all treasures were found. And we use dismemberment metaphors in our language all the time. We say we're falling apart, we can't get it together, our hearts are broken, our lives are shattered. And while if I imagine being in that story, aside from Set's inner circle, everybody probably thought Osiris's destiny was to be the king of Egypt. His true destiny was to be the king of the underworld, and he literally had to come apart to come back together in a new way. And that's really what trauma does for us, because you can't be the same person that you were previously.
So do you think a lot of that has to do with people trying to be the person they were before the traumatic event? A lot of suffering?
Absolutely. It's this letting go of who you were to become something else, to really live out your bigger purpose and become the, and really step into your destiny in a bigger way.
Which is exactly what the Georgia Abrams.
What Stacey Abraham? No, that's
Stacey
exactly what she did. And I think the
Yeah.
speed, I don't know what her personal struggle with the loss
During the time, right,
if any, but I think it's really fascinating to me where she flipped that around very quick, relatively quickly, that there wasn't like a, she didn't take a bath in the wound for years,
doesn't personality have to do with that a lot though?
Think, for sure. Yeah. Well, I mean, I think yes. And
or some people just struggle a little bit more to turn it around.
Absolutely. And I won't minimize the potential that like some of us came with some of us, I think our soul logic is not always our human logic, and the paths that we end up on are, I recognize that it's, like some people have very difficult lives, but when you can expand though to give it purpose and meaning, and this is very clear in the psychiatric literature, that when you can put meaning to your trauma, that's really how you move forward. And even in like certain kidnapping situations, and this happened a long time ago in the 80s, but it's profiled in a book called Waking the Tiger. And a whole school bus of kids was kidnapped. And the ones that didn't need long-term therapy were the ones that had tried to figure out how to get out. And so there's value in figuring in, when something happens and you don't see it as entirely as an obstacle, you go, okay, I'm going to let me see what the, here's the, obviously not going down that road. Let's see, or what's the workaround, or how am I going to solve this problem?
Yeah.
And what is this showing me? And what is it offering me, as opposed to only what is it taking away from me? I
would definitely be one of the kids trying to figure out how to escape that place. I know that for a fact.
And so I think that probably and so having a language for this problem solving, and really being able to use the story and the energetics to see it, because I do them in groups as guided meditations to get people to transform themselves. So like if I was going to scan your energy here. All right. So I would say that your Leo energy in your heart is not, is someone outside of yourself. Like it's not fully centered in you. And so if you were so we could do this a few different ways. Like I could take you through a guided meditation in terms of deciding what your lion looks like and what's happening with it, to really, and then to kind of treat the archetype, to get you to treat the archetype, to give the lion what it needs, to find your own medicine for it. For clients I work with, I'll put it back for them very often, and then follow up with the lion meditation. The other thing that this tells me is that you might not have enough breathing space on the backside of your rib cage. And that you're a little bit, I would say maybe projecting. So I'll say maybe projecting a little bit too worried about the future is how I might interpret that. But there's a tribe in the Andes Mountains in South America, and they say that your future is behind you, propelling you forward. And your past is in front of you, waiting for you to make peace with it and clear your way. And so one of my vagus nerve decompression exercises is to have people inhale into the backside of their heart, because the backside of the heart is one of the places the vagus nerve can get compressed in your posterior mediastinum. And I'll have people do that in a very specific position. But then as they do that, I'll have them connect with, like, breathe into their future and connect with it on the backside, that you bring your future from behind you out into truth in front of you.
It's very interesting you got that read on me, because it's probably one of the things that I work on most is like relaxing on that.
Yeah.
Worry about the future at all.
Well, and your body's literally telling that story.
I got nervous when you started putting your hands up.
When I put my
what's she gonna find? There's always something we're hiding. I'm like, oh no.
Always. Well, and I'll tell you, healers are the worst bunch of them. Like, we're all hot messes to some extent. Like, your guru is a hot mess. I can guarantee it at some level. You've been through the hot, the big hot mess. Like, for me, this work for me has been, I know that this is so much about decompressing my own vagus nerve and figuring it out for myself, and that when I work with people on that, I get a piece of that healing too. And it helps me understand myself as much as it helps me understand them. Yeah.
And you can see how authentic that is, because that's what you said in the beginning. That's what lights you up, is that learning and figuring out and discovering.
Yeah. Oh, and people are so creative. And, I very lovingly tell people that, 50 or 60% of people, I would say, read the textbook before I've seen them, that I understand this pattern. I know exactly how it's going to go. It's going to be very predictable. Like 30%, I would say, did not read the textbook, but I've read this textbook and I know how it's going to go. But this isn't, you're not exactly following the standard rules, but I can logic this one through. And there's always a handful of people that wrote their own textbook, and I have to read it to understand what's happening, that they don't respond to conventional practices and conventional interventions. They don't respond in the conventional way. And if you don't know how to read their textbook, they're continually going to fall through the cracks in the medical system. And the medical system in the United States has one of the biggest Osiris wounds of all. It's chopped up into pieces, and one part doesn't know where the other part is. And we could potentially say that about our political system too. And part of my really big vision is taking the vagus nerve into, I've been putting it out as a business model and as a leadership model and as an organizational model and an economic model, so that we can really start redesigning our systems to mimic ourselves, to try and organically make us all healthier. When our vagus nerves are functioning better, we are all healthier. And how can we create systems that mimic the vagus nerve that then organically make all of us healthier, so we don't have to work so hard? Because I find when I decompress somebody's vagus nerve, I don't have to work so hard. And businesses have, and the person doesn't have to work so hard at getting better, that we get done, like they can have, years, months or years of pain, and, that can be gone very quickly. And, I think business has a really huge opportunity here, because to me, wellness is really keeping people out of my office and everybody else's office. I would totally, I really would love to just go teach wellness care and like build awareness so that people can, start to recognize these different patterns. When our heroics and our desires are at odds with each other, that shows up as vagus nerve compression at the base of the skull. And when our emotions and our adaptability are at odds with each other, it shows up as vagus nerve compression across the shoulders. And when our operating point and our nutrition are at odds with each other, it shows up as vagus nerve compression around the heart. And so there are these very predictable patterns that if we, that are very like, that I've taken and worded in terms that are very relevant and applicable to leadership. And I've treated enough executives to know that, what's showing up in their bodies and what's showing up in their business. And going back to that heroics and desires piece, we're often trying to be the hero in someone else's story at the expense of our own, or we're not sure what we desire, or we're satisfying everybody else's desires at the expense of our own. And that will show up as a head or neck problem.
Mm-hmm. So no matter how many chiropractor visits you go to, maybe that's not what's the issue.
Right. Or if you have to go back, if you keep having to go back and back and back, I would say they're not solving the problem. Like if I have to treat the same thing twice, I get really irritated with myself because I didn't fix it the first time.
That's great. I would love that attitude from most caretakers. Interesting. What do I have to do to get you, by the way, to walk me through the meditation that you think that I would need to or should go through with what you've found with the energy?
Oh, do you want to do it right now? Or do you on air? Do you want to do it?
Do you have time?
Off air? Yeah, I have time.
Oh, beautiful. Yeah, let's do it.
Okay. So go ahead and close your eyes. And bring your attention to your breath and your breath to your heart. And I want you to imagine the lion that lives in your heart. And imagine what he looks like. His coloring on his body and his mane. What do his paws look like? And what kind of ground is he standing or sitting on? What's his posture? In what direction is he facing? Now look at his tail. See if it's moving or it's still. Is it swatting away flies? Or is it relaxed? And does your lion have any veneration? Does he have a crown or a cape or any kind of jewelry? Does he have a wound that needs attention? Ask your lion what he needs, what he desires. Stay centered in your chest. To heal his wound. And when you have an answer, just offer your lion what he's asking for. And take a few more breaths. You can have any other conversation you'd like to have with this lion. You can come back to this space anytime you'd like to continue. And when you're ready, open your eyes. How was that?
It was cool. It was nice. I was picturing, since the very beginning when you asked me to picture a lion like blonde, soft, very soft, well groomed, and like on his back, like playing. That's how I pictured my lion.
Awesome.
Yeah, right from the beginning.
So what does that tell you about staying centered?
More play and social fun in my life is probably needed.
Exactly. And does that resonate?
It completely does. Like,
so there you go.
Completely beyond resonation.
Yeah. So
cool.
So it's play is your medicine. Something. Yes, it's telling you something, right?
Especially right now.
One of my students that I taught a certification course this year for the first time, and I have another round of it that I'm going to start in early 2021. And it was mostly healthcare professionals with some yoga instructors, hypnotherapists, and a couple other, I had an artist and a medium in there as well. And but one of my students is doing brilliant work taking people through guided meditations of these archetypes to help resolve old trauma, and it helps them work through the trauma without re-traumatizing them.
Kind of like what you just did.
Yes, yeah, very similar. Yes, she's dealing with, she's dealing with a more heavily traumatized group of people than I typically do, but yeah, absolutely. But it's the same, and when being able to kind of work through the story outside of yourself is incredibly healing. I think that's why we're even attracted to like CSI type shows and murder mysteries and and what we and even violent movies, is that we're vicariously trying to resolve trauma. Not vicarious. I don't know if vicariously is the right word. We're trying to we're using that to work as a tool to work through our trauma.
Oh, as you're talking about this, and I was picturing my lion too when you brought me through that. I was thinking afterwards, if there was anybody that's ever like pictured like a fierce lion, like ready to attack and like teeth out, has that ever been a thing?
Yeah, no, sometimes they're angry. Like they're like the angry, child that didn't get attention. There's, absolutely, they get angry, they get depressed and really sad. Sometimes they put on costumes like they're kind of faking it and you have to get, and so there's I use some, my intuition also to guide the process. So just to keep asking the questions. It's just a matter of asking the questions. And, when you start to ask the right questions, you start to get the answers you need. Finding your answers is all about asking the question.
Do you have a couple more minutes?
Yeah.
Okay. I just am enjoying our conversation. And,
no, this is fun.
I want to ask, because it's the climate of the country right now. It's kind of like just taking a small shift.
Mm-hmm.
We briefly touched on it. You put on your Instagram that Joe Biden was the benevolent grandfather, that he represents that. And I was curious, does that have to do with like the cosmos and astrology, or what's going on?
Yeah, no, well, there's been a lot happening in Capricorn, which would be the patriarchy and the structures. And there's been Pluto and Saturn and Jupiter are all there, and Jupiter and Saturn are getting ready to move into Aquarius on December 21st, 2020.
Mm-hmm.
So that should signal a shift, but the astrology has absolutely been highlighting the patriarchal structures that aren't serving us and bringing, and starting to get those dismantled, or to, we're starting to see them in different lights, that the much of the darkness is up on the surface.
Sure.
In a big way right 100%. Now. Yeah. And and it's also supporting the rise of the feminine, and particularly, then this is where I love my astrologer, Marcia Wade, is really brilliant at looking at these things, but really looking at the, like not just the rise of the feminine, but the rise of the African goddess is really showing up in the astrology too, that so supports Stacey Abrams and Kamala Harris, and and
how often does that come about?
Well, the African Goddess Asteroids, or the one I'm thinking of, and I'm not even going to try and pronounce her name because it's got punctuate, like an exclamation point in the middle of it.
Problem.
So I'm not even sure how to pronounce it. Begins with a G, and she's in my astrology group, we call her Aardvark girl. And she's like represented as an aardvark goddess. Okay. And she's a very slow mover. Like I'm 50 and she's moved 20 degrees in the 50 years that 60 degrees through two signs from, or really, when I was born in my chart, it's at 15 Aries, and that asteroid's at 15 Gemini right now. And so it moves very, very slowly. So it's holding a really big space. Jupiter and Saturn being conjunct in 0 Aquarius only happens every 20 years. So it's a very much sort of a marker of an era. And this is the first time in quite a while that they've been in an air sign. Aquarius is an air sign. So it's going to be interesting just to see how communication shifts with this. But getting it out of Capricorn and out of that, the shadow of that patriarchal structure, I think bodes well in the aggregate, but obviously change, on a cosmic scale is maybe not as quick. A cosmic second is the length of our lives, kind of, if you want to, in the aggregate. But I think that the change, I think there will be some good positive change, and I think definitely a growing awareness of mental health, for sure. I think that's, we certainly, it's well established out there that, we've been in a mental health crisis for a long time, and the pandemic is just going to continue to amplify that,
exasperate the heck out of it.
Absolutely. And we haven't even really seen the full fallout because, it's because we're just 9 months into the pandemic. In a year and 2 years, I think we're going to see more and more. And so this mental health piece and this vagus nerve piece, I think, is going to become increasingly essential for people. And, and the pandemic has really shown us that we can flip things it's really challenged our belief structures. Like if you had asked a business what it was going to take to get everybody to work at home, they would have said, oh, that's going to have to be a 3-month plan or a 6-month plan or something like that. And they all did it over a weekend in March.
Yeah. I've been working from home for like eight years, and a couple of companies that I'm close with, like, you guys got to get more remote. I've been saying it for like 5 years, and they're like, it's too hard. There's no way. And then all of a sudden in a week they did it, and they're loving it. And they're like, so there's a lot of these companies that are really enjoying what it's doing. And it's interesting. It's very interesting.
Yeah. So I think really challenging our belief systems about how fast change can happen, and that we can, and that we're having to be resourceful and think about different ways of doing things, that this old paradigm that we were all working in, we know wasn't serving us. And so now it's been dismantled in a big way, which is obviously very traumatic for a lot of people, but it also opens up space for new solutions.
And I was thinking about one thing is like what Donald Trump has created over the last 4 years. It's kind of forcing, now that Joe Biden won, it's kind of forcing his campaign to like focus more on kindness, probably more than he ever thought before ever in his whole life. So I think that could be a positive twist of events.
No, I think that there's I can't talk about it without just off the cuff, because I don't have it memorized, but the astrology of his chart is fascinating. And in human design, that's an astrology based system, his incarnation cross, which is the reason like he incarnated, is called the Garden of Eden. So he came to bring back the Garden of Eden. Now he's largely lived in the shadow of that as a real estate developer. He's essentially sort of created the opposite of it, but he, perhaps he's also the harbinger that, made things so bad to give the momentum for them to get better. Potentially we would have been much more status quo.
Right.
So under Hillary Clinton, that it would not have, that these shadow elements would not have been quite so visible. And you can't heal what you can't see. And I think our medical privacy laws are really killing us. I think we have to be witnessed to truly heal, that it really serves us to be more in the open about our wounds and to tell our stories. And, as I've told my story over and over, the response I almost always get is, oh, me too. Or this is what, that it's not, that, I get real support and encouragement rather than, like nobody's run away from me when I've told my lawsuit story.
Right. And it's more of like people find ways to relate.
They find ways to relate to it. And I thought, and it was, it really destroyed my self-worth for a while. But it has, I was able to transform it into a really incredible gift. And there was certainly a period of time where I would not have said anything about it to anyone.
Yeah. What was your period of time, if you don't mind me asking, your shift? Was it 6 months? Was it more of like a year, 2 years?
Well, I would say that period of time was probably really hard for 4 years. Mm-hmm. And I would say the next 3 years after that were easier, but it was still, it was undoing a lot of things, like having I say the genie didn't fit back in the bottle. No matter how hard I tried to go back in, it didn't, it didn't work. And it screwed a lot of, or unscrew, like I always imagine that it literally just unscrewed a lid off my life that had been on very, very tightly. And so I really learned, I had to learn to really see myself differently and to, and really what happened is that I fell in love with myself. I had been, I never sought help for it, but I always had this script that I wasn't worthy and that I might kill myself, that there was this drive, this self-destruct, I had this very self-destructive script in my head for really from probably when I was, I don't know, 7, 8, 9 years old, something like that, all the way until when I was 41. And in the midst of the crisis, that really, for as hard as it was, that really, it turned it all off.
Wow.
And I love my life now more than I ever have. And, if you ask me if I would trade any of that or do it differently, I don't know if I would, because and it was awful. It was excruciating. There's pieces of it that are still excruciating. I'm writing my book right now. And so I'm writing, I'm reliving some of these things. They were really excruciating and deeply personal.
I wanted to ask you how was your relationship with it now when you, and I asked this because I can relate to a similar thing, business partner, it was crazy, took a bunch of money, all this stuff. And I had to work through it. But it comes up, it still is always a part of us. Right. No matter what, you can't get rid of it. There's no rid, right? You have to, I don't know how to explain what
you give it. I give it some story and give it some, and give it a role and a purpose. And when I think about that, the story of Isis and Osiris. And I identify very closely with Isis, the one who kept because she put Osiris back together all the time. And that's been largely the role that I've played in my life for other people, is putting everything back together. My husband would tell you that I'm the reason he's still walking upright.
Oh,
okay. But really we're every character in every story. And so to think where I was sabotaging, and planning and plotting the coming apart, and, and where I was Osiris chopped into pieces. And when you can really own all of those parts of yourself and all of those parts of your story, then they, at the very least, live peacefully in my body. And I think healing is very circular or orbital in the cosmic sense, that you don't get rid of something, it circles back to you, but ideally it circles back to you in a different way, or in a way you recognize and you see it and you're like, oh, look how far I've come. Even when something terrible happens to me now, even if it's not as terrible, I'm like, oh, look how far I've come, or isn't that interesting that I did that? That's
I did
terrible.
that. I wouldn't do that now.
I would not do. Right. Or or even if it is something I wouldn't do, I still try to sort of be, not to be angry, to go, oh, isn't that fascinating that I did that? How do I not do that again?
Yeah. Interesting. Yes.
Look what I did. and so, part of it's about the ownership of it. And even for things that aren't my, that aren't my fault, that there's still something in that to own and learn as well.
Yeah, well, if we're all playing each piece of part of the story, then there's definitely an involvement of some way, shape, or form that we can forgive or whatever.
Absolutely. And I think just having a lot of compassion for yourself. We are all incredibly slow learners, no matter how wise we might be.
Hey, speak for yourself.
We are all slow learners. And so, and it can be really funny, but it's I think just in the way that things karmically play out. Even post-election, that Trump's press conference was at a Four Seasons.
Oh, that is so brilliantly great.
Landscaping, between a porn shop and a crematorium is just it doesn't, I don't care who you are. That's funny. Or what you believe.
No matter what, it's hilarious.
No matter what, it's hilarious. And it's, and there's just this really karmic aspect to it. But I think you can find this hilarity in much of our trauma, usually not until there's some hindsight. With
it. 2020, we're all going to find hilarity in it in 5-10 years.
Right. So here we're in a pandemic that's completely changing how we see things in the year 2020. It's hilarious, and that it would happen in the year 2020, and that it's showing, it's like we're seeing how our behavior affects others. We're seeing the government differently. We're seeing each other differently. The emotions and stuff are not, below the surface, and behaviors are not staying below the surface. And corona means crown, and so like the beginning of this, I was like, oh, this is a really interesting kind of crown chakra thing, perhaps because naming is incredibly powerful. And I think it's hilarious that while we had this corona crown chakra thing going on, everybody's hoarding toilet paper for their root chakra.
Like that's not the right chakra you're supposed to be hoarding stuff
right. For. It's like, well, as above, so below, I guess. That's the only rule we really ever follow. But like I think you could really find the karmic humor in it.
Yeah, that's so.
No
great.
Matter what, and I think in that humor always softens it. I've often said that how Keegan-Michael Key was Obama's anger translator, that I have this vision, and I need a good writer for it, but to be people's pain translators, because I think it's. Because I think when you can laugh at yourself, that you go, oh, like, that's part of how you can learn, and you can realize how ridiculous you're being sometimes when you're digging your heels in about resisting change.
Yeah.
It's your own transformation.
As you say that, it reminds me of like, so since the social media age, I don't think there's been more memes or posts in December of 2019 about how 2020 is going to be this person's year. 2020 is my year. This is the year I'm going after it. I'm getting it done. I'm losing this weight. I'm going to do this. I'm going to start this business. And all of a sudden it like 2020 smacked everybody in the face.
Yeah.
And I wonder if that like was like, okay, people, let's slow down a little bit here.
Absolutely. Yeah. But it's completely transforming our vision and how we see things. Like, and it's completely, in a way that I think is, that if we can just kind of take that and, when we've all had the experience of being addicted to being right, or certainly working with somebody who's addicted to being right. And when somebody's addicted to being right, they're having a dopamine cocktail in their head. They're high. They feel amazing. Like, we love being right. And the person on the other side of that conversation is having a cortisol cocktail. They're having a stress hormone cocktail. And so we're really being challenged to see that there's a third option. I think that's really what polarity to me is really a trinity, because when you have like a North Pole and a South Pole, the third thing is that electromagnetic field. It creates a third thing, that electromagnetic field. And so I think we have to continually ask what else is true, and what do we need to look at, that maybe it's not the pole we need to look at, it's the field we need to look at.
Like all of this. I love everything we've talked about today.
This is so fun. This has been a great conversation, Justin.
This is definitely, so I've gone like an hour and 15, hour and 20, and then, but this is the longest, and I appreciate you coming on and sharing everything on here. I was going to wrap it up with a couple huge takeaways, but I lost that train of thought about 20 minutes ago, so I'm not going to do that. As we started getting more and more into it. So thank you so much, Melanie. Honestly, like your time and your wisdom, like really, really thank you. I appreciate it.
Oh, this has been so much fun. I thank you for sharing your platform so that I can get my message out to your listeners.
So you did mention a couple times before we wrap it up, where can people find you? And just to kind of reiterate what you can do for somebody.
Mm-hmm. My website is melanieweller.com, MELANIEWELLER. And my social media handles on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook are Embody Your Star. It's all under my name, but the handle is Embody Your Star. And I do work with people individually. I am really focusing on speaking engagements, classes. I train healthcare practitioners and other allied health professionals in my process. And that's an online thing. And I train them all over the world. I had people in Australia, New Zealand, UK, Italy in my last class. So
to do what you do and help
to do what I do.
Yes.
Wow. Okay, cool. Yes. And I'm I'm building out that educational platform. These things take time. I'm very interested in training business coaches in this process. And, and I do some consulting with, like, in terms of leadership and problem solving at the business level as well. So,
and all this stuff can be found on your
you
website.
can find it on my website, or email me. My contact information is all over my website. My email is ask@melanieweller.com, and I'm not hard to get in touch with. My website's a little, it's always an ongoing process with the offerings. I have classes now and then, and so just check it for updates and join the email list. The opt-in box is at the bottom of my homepage, and it'll send you a free vagus nerve decompression course and some other resources and workbook to look at your compression points. So
I'm definitely going to do that. I want to check that out for sure. So thank you for everything you do. Thanks for all the great ripple effects you're creating. When you help someone else, they tell other people, and then they get helped and all that.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. And I will press stop now and